Hey, I'm Hallie, and we're learning today that the suspect accused of murdering 7 innocent people apparently confessed to what he did, according to police, was even considering another attack the same day. And we'll get to those extraordinary new developments in a second, but before we do, we want to center the victims here. We want to take a minute to show you the names and the faces. Look at your screen, however you're watching, of the 7 people who just showed up at this parade, just showed up on the 4th of July to hang out in town, to spend some time with family and friends. 7 lives stolen. And we've learned the name now of the 7th victim, Eduardo Uvaldo. He would have turned 70 years old this Friday. Now, instead of planning a birthday party, his family is planning a funeral. His wife and his grandson were also hurt. Luckily, they are not in the hospital. Katie Goldstein was also shot and killed, as her daughter is now sharing more about what happened to her as she was at the parade with her mom. Listen.
I told her that it was a shooter and that she had to run, so I started running with her. And we were next to each other, and he shot her in the chest, and she fell down, and I knew she was dead. She was just a good mom, and I got to have 22 years with the best mom in the world.
It's a gut punch to hear. The confessed killer, who you see here in court, a virtual appearance today, is going to be held without bail on 7 counts of first-degree murder. And the state's attorneys say they expect more charges to come.
For each individual was hurt, people can anticipate an attempt murder charge as well as an aggravated battery with a firearm charge.
And then there's this. The killer apparently drove to Madison, Wisconsin after the Highland Park parade, according to the sheriff's office, where he stumbled on another celebration and thought about shooting more people there because he had dozens of rounds left and another gun he had in the car. All of it, as tonight there are new questions about the suspect's parents and whether they could also face charges. Their attorney, they have lawyers now, their attorney in a series of tweets saying the parents are being scapegoated by the, quote, system, when the focus should be on easy access to military-grade assault weapons. Dasha Burns is joining us now from Highland Park. And Dasha, let me start here with the victims. Before we get into the developments that we've learned about the suspect today, I want to talk about the people whose names we should remember, the lives that were taken, including Kevin and Irina McCarthy. They have a 2-year-old, a toddler, now an orphan, a toddler who, by the way, was with them at the parade. I spoke with a state senator whose district is Highland Park, who was at the parade, and she was, you could tell, just gutted as she was talking about the resources that people like the McCarthys need now to keep going after such incredible trauma.
Yeah, Hallie, those resources are so needed here because after the cameras go away, after the caution tape comes down, after that street behind me where this all took place is open again, this community is going to continue to grieve the lives lost, the folks wounded, and the people who survived, who now have to process the trauma that they've witnessed, especially these children. That 2-year-old you mentioned, Aiden, his parents both deceased. His father's last act was shielding his son, protecting his son. That is how his 2-year-old will remember his dad. Other lives lost, you mentioned a couple of the names. Jackie Sunheim, a former teacher and a lifelong member of a synagogue here, who says her kindness and warmth touched everyone. Catherine Goldstein, you heard from her daughter there. Her daughter also saying that her mom was waving to all of the floats that passed by. She came to the parade to get out of the house after she had been mourning her own mother's passing. Nicholas Toledo, 78, a grandfather whose family actually convinced him to come to the parade. He initially didn't want to go, but he's disabled and needed some help, so they brought him along. And Stephen Strauss, 88 years old, working still as a stockbroker. His family says he was an exceptional joker, an avid reader, and a culture vulture. And Eduardo Uvaldo, who we just learned about today, he would have been 70 years old on Friday, Hallie. So many more lives, though, impacted by this. These losses will reverberate for a long time here.
It's just so difficult to think about. We heard from the state's attorney, and we showed it in the introduction here, saying that for every one of these other victims, right, not just the people who died, the people for whom those first-degree murder charges are being brought against the suspect, but the people who were hurt as well. There's also this question now that I think people are centering on of the suspect's parents, because as we talked about in breaking news 24 hours ago on this show last night, we just had found out that it was his father who signed off on him being able to get a permit to even be able to buy a gun legally in the state of Illinois. This was just a few months after police visited apparently because a family member had suggested this person was going to kill everybody, took a bunch of knives out of the house, etc.
Yeah.
Talk through the tweets now from the the parents' lawyer, who's basically saying, like, the system failed here, because legal experts that I've talked to have suggested that these parents may actually, potentially, could end up facing liability.
Yeah, the big question of what's next here, both for the gunman and for his parents, is really important, both for our reporting and our viewers, but also for the community here who wants some accountability. People feel helpless; they want some action taken here, right? The systems question is significant, though, because look, you've got these red flag laws in Illinois, but clearly this didn't either didn't come up to that standard or was sort of lost in the system. When the police came to the home to confiscate those knives, at that point there was no flag about guns. There was no those videos that we've seen since all of this has happened, those disturbing social media posts. Those hadn't been flagged to law enforcement before this. But you're right, just months after that incident, Hallie, where he did threaten, he said he wanted to kill everyone, police came to the house, and yet just months after that, he was able to purchase these guns. And I think this is where the systems is an issue, but also, his parents have a lawyer now, and I think there is there are a lot of questions around where this goes for his family members, because clearly there were warning signs.
More questions. We will stay on top of this story, obviously. Dasha Burns, thank you for being there live for us in Highland Park. It is one of those awful realities of the business that we're in that we have to cover not just one, but multiple mass shootings in a single newscast. That is not something we like doing, right? But in this instance tonight, we have not only what happened in Highland Park, but what happened a couple of months ago in Uvalde, Texas, that horrific school shooting, the massacre of those 19 little kids and those 2 hero teachers. With this new review, this new report out today talking about some key missteps. It shows that a police officer had the suspect, had the shooter in that case, in his sights, the sights of his rifle, before the gunman went into Robb Elementary, but never took the shot. Apparently, this officer, according to this report, turned his head to ask his supervisor for permission. When he turned back around, the shooter was gone. The report also confirmed what we knew before, that the door to the classroom where the killer barricaded himself was never locked, and it looked like no officer waiting in the hallway during the shooting ever tested to see if the door was, in fact, locked. The school district's police chief has previously told the Texas Tribune he had checked the door, but it was locked. This is a review by a training center at Texas State University for active shooter situations. It was requested by the Texas Department of Public Safety. It found that when officers did go into that classroom more than an hour later, they weren't really better equipped than they were when the shooter first went in. It also found that officers could have used other ways to try to get into class. They could have broken windows, busted through sheetrock, for example, from an adjoining classroom. I talked with Texas State Senator Roland Gutierrez about all this within just the last couple hours. He tells me this whole thing was just an absolute failure from top to bottom. Watch.
Certainly very concerned about what we've seen. There was 12 officers in that hallway from DPS. Not to just point at them, but there was 8 different agencies. What happened here was entire system error, violations of protocol at every level, and just failure, law enforcement failure at every level.
You think about the families, of course, in Uvalde, the memorial there outside Robb Elementary School, what they must be going through tonight and every night. We're going to stay on top of this story as there are more fact-finding reviews that have been launched after the worst school shooting in Texas history. Turning now to news from Washington, with President Biden not here inside the Beltway, but instead out in Cleveland, Ohio, promoting a plan to protect the pensions of millions of workers, in part to try to shore up his support among blue-collar workers. Listen.
Think of all the people, and many of you went to bed at night putting your head in the pillow and saying, am I going to be all right? Is my family going to be all right? Well, I'm here today to say we've done something about it.
The president touting a piece of his economic plan. I don't love the word touting. The president's promoting a piece of his economic plan, right? That makes more sense, I think. At a time when, listen, he's struggling with low approval ratings. He's struggling on that front. You've got inflation at a 40-year high. Now, that said, unemployment is down, but people are feeling the pinch from spending more on groceries, gas, et cetera. This rule he's talking about today, by the way, part of a program created under the American Rescue Plan. It ensures full benefits for something like 2 to 3 million workers and retired people. Because, as you might know, pension plan investments didn't exactly do awesome under all this recent economic roller coaster ride we've been on. Mike Memoli is joining us now. So, Mem, let me start here. There is a policy component to this that we've laid out, protecting pensions for millions of workers. But there is a political component to this as well. The president, in a state where there is a key Senate race, a state that he would love for Democrats to be looking at, taking back in 2024. And he was sort of clear going after Republicans, going after what he called the ultra MAGA, that there was, politics at play in this moment.
Absolutely, Hallie. There's been a lot of questions lately about not just the White House's messaging, but also the messenger, whether President Biden is really doing enough to speak to the concerns, to the real frustrations within his own party, but also to ordinary Americans right now dealing with these economic strains. And it was notable, right? Think of all the economic issues right now that he could have gone to Ohio to talk about: inflation, gas prices. He was talking about, I don't want to call it a parochial issue, but something that only affects 2 to 3 million Americans, union workers. But the president was eager to talk about it, called it a promise made and a promise delivered. The president really hasn't been able to get out on the road too much to promote his domestic agenda. This was just the third time in 2 months that he's really done a standalone trip like what we saw today to talk about his domestic agenda. But there's been one through line, Hallie, through all of this, and that is unions. This was the third union event he's done in 3 months, and you mentioned it. This is part of the president trying to shore up one of the bedrock Democratic constituencies, organized labor. I talked to the head of the AFL-CIO just a couple weeks ago. She said she's ready to sign up for Biden 2024. So as there's been a lot of talk about maybe who else is out there and whether Biden is the right person to lead the party, this is one constituency the president can count on.
Mike Memoli live at the White House for us on that. Ma'am, great to see you. Thank you. As we talk about President Biden, let's talk about something else he is doing today, and that is this new push to give some kind of comfort to Brittany Griner and her family as the WNBA superstar gets ready for her second court appearance in Moscow tomorrow. The White House says both the president and the vice president spoke with Griner's wife, Sherelle. The president said they're working to try to get Brittany out of this Russian prison ASAP. They're working on the release, too, of other Americans who the U.S. says are wrongfully detained, like Paul Whelan, who's also in Russia. The president also says he read a draft of the letter he's planning to send to Brittany Griner after she sent one to him. Remember, we talked about this. She wrote in her letter she's terrified she might be in Russia forever. Griner's facing up to 10 years in prison after being accused of having vape cartridges with cannabis. We're expecting to hear from Sherelle Griner tonight when BG, as she's known, Brittany Griner's team, the Phoenix Mercury, hosts a big Bring BG Home rally at the team's arena. Andrea Mitchell, our chief foreign affairs correspondent, is live for us here in Washington. So let me take this in two buckets, Andrea, and let me start with, listen, there have been a lot of developments today, right? There's been a lot of talk. There's been a lot of push for comfort to the family, pledging to try to bring them home. But let's talk concrete details. The actual mechanism of getting her out of this Russian prison and getting her back to the U.S. What practically are we seeing as far as progress on that front?
Well, once they decided that she was wrongfully detained, when she was charged and being put on trial, where they realized that there's not going to be any back-channel negotiations with Russia right now, once the U.S. did that, they set the hostage negotiation team on this. But they've made no progress from anything that we can determine. Vladimir Putin in no mood to make a deal, to do a trade. He did one for Trevor Reed. As you well know, he was the former Marine who got out in April. But now they're really raising the stakes. And what the official state media says is they want a prisoner swap for a man named Victor Bout, who is a notorious arms dealer. This is a much bigger ask for the President of the United States to give up this convicted criminal who's got a 25-year sentence in an American prison. So, and it, is a criminal for someone who is completely innocent, Brittany Griner. So that's the deal. And the other bottom line is that, frankly, people in the State Department do not expect anything to move on this until her trial ends, most likely with a conviction, because 99% of the people who go on trial in Russia, which has no presumption of innocence, get convicted. And that could lead to a 10-year sentence. So that really raises the stakes. It could be weeks and weeks till this trial is over, and a long time before Brittany even, is possibly up for a prisoner swap.
Right. We talked about what has been so striking is how her family and friends have gone from saying almost nothing in the beginning, February, March, April, when the detention first happened, to after the U.S. making that wrongful detainment assessment, coming out more and more with this public push, to the point where there's a rally tonight that we talked about out at her team arena. I'm so struck by this, Andrea. You talked with head coach VANESSA NYGAARD, who's obviously BG's coach, who brought up the point about gender inequity here and racial inequity here, who said basically, if we were talking about LeBron James, right, Brittany Griner would already be home.
Well, she's been there 139 days as of today, and there wasn't a whole big fuss for her. Frankly, the family and friends were told, you know, stay quiet because we think we can work this out. Why they thought they could work it out with Vladimir Putin when we were at war helping Ukraine against Russia's illegal invasion is another issue. So they held out that hope, and that didn't work. And so here's what, you know, VANESSA NYGAARD said, that she wasn't getting as much attention. They're underpaid compared to the men, and they don't have a media deal. They don't have a television contract. That's the big bucks here. Here's what she said.
We get 4% of the media coverage, so BG's got 4% of the attention that she's needed in this situation. Whoever the athlete, a male athlete of equivalent status, of equivalent achievement of BG, an Olympian, the most dominant player in the WNBA, I'm sure that if it was a male athlete, it would be different basically on media coverage.
So, you know, she's raised the issue of the fact of gender is a big issue, that she's a gay athlete. A lot of things that, you know, are undervalued, and that women just don't get paid as much. That's why she was in Russia in the first place. They all work overseas to make the big bucks that they're not getting back home.
We're going to be watching this story again tomorrow, Andrea, at her next court appearance in Moscow. Thank you so much for being on top of this for us. Appreciate it. Good to see you.
Thank you, Hallie.
Elsewhere in Washington, a key witness to the January 6th committee's investigation into the attack on the Capitol has now agreed to testify. We're talking about a name that you maybe didn't know a few years ago, but you probably heard of now, Pat Cipollone. He's the former White House counsel, basically the former top lawyer in the White House to Donald Trump. He is expected to meet with the committee behind closed doors on Friday. It's an interview that, according to a person familiar with the matter, will be transcribed and videotaped after the committee basically sent a subpoena over to Cipollone just last week that said, hey, we were putting some legal muscle behind this request to have you testify. It comes after this woman, former White House aide CASSIE Hutchinson, testified and said Cipollone warned her not to let former President Trump go to the Capitol after his speech on January 6th.
I saw Mr. Cipollone right before I walked out onto West Exec that morning, and Mr. Cipollone said something to the effect of, please make sure we don't go up to the Capitol, Cassidy. Keep in touch with me. We're going to get charged with every crime imaginable if we make that movement happen.
Joining me now is Hallie Raffa. And Hallie, I think that quote from CASSIE Hutchinson helps explain a lot of why the committee is so eager to talk to Pat Cipollone formally. They've spoken with him informally already. And Congressman Adam Schiff said to the Associated Press that he thought it was hard to imagine somebody who's more at the center of things. This is somebody who is in those meetings, not just before January 6th on the election fraud push, those lies that former President Trump was spreading, but on January 6th, the day of the insurrection itself.
Yeah, Hallie, and we've heard his name mentioned in so many of these hearings already. You know, we heard him mentioned in that hearing with Justice Department officials. We even heard him mentioned in Jared Kushner's pre-recorded testimony during one of these hearings. So this is someone that the committee knows was at the center of these discussions. And this is someone who the committee really knows what he knows because of what you mentioned at the top there, those informal talks that we know Cipollone has had with the committee, but they really couldn't present to the American people. And Justice Department officials who we know, because they've said so, are watching these hearings because this was not under oath. This was not on the record. Now they have Cipollone under oath in a pre-recorded testimony that we very may likely see parts of in this next hearing on Tuesday. This is someone who we know was at the center of so many scenes going on in the White House before, during, and after January 6th, who was vocally in opposition to so many things that he saw. We heard so much of that from CASSIE Hutchinson's testimony. So this is definitely a big accomplishment for the committee to get Cipollone finally, after months of trying, on the record, under oath, testifying before the committee, Hallie.
And what's interesting, given the timing here, Hallie, if Cipollone does speak with them, let's say Friday, right, and what is going to be videotaped, transcribed behind closed doors, sure, we have seen the committee play video clips from similar depositions, right, from similar testimony. It's entirely
of concerns over executive privilege, but we've seen these two prior talk to the committee in these pre-recorded testimonies really about everything but their private conversations with the former president. So they've been able to really skirt around that executive privilege claim. As far as what to expect in the next hearing, we haven't been able to independently confirm this, but there are still reports that former Deputy Press Secretary Sarah Matthews could also testify, and that could also give another angle as to what we heard was going on in the White House during that attack, that exhaustive effort by White House aides to get former President Trump to put something out condemning the rioters, condemning the violence at the Capitol. So there's definitely a lot more to expect in these next few hearings that committee members say will go into really what was going on inside the White House and at the Capitol during the 187 minutes that it was under attack. Hallie.
Hallie Rafa live for us on the Hill. Thanks, Hallie. To Ukraine now, where, as we speak, Russian forces are hitting a new phase. They're pushing into a new phase of this war. Take a look right now at where Moscow's troops are. They're basically trying to clear a path from their last stronghold in an area called Luhansk to two cities 50 miles to the west. You see the map there. You've already got a ton of artillery fire hitting these cities. Look at this on whatever screen you're watching. Damage in stores, active fires where the shelling has already hit. The regional governor in Donetsk says they're already asking hundreds of thousands of people to get out and to get out fast, as the UN now estimates that a full third of Ukrainians have been forced out of their homes since February. Think about that. Think about a third of all the people in a country having to leave their homes. That's what's happening on the ground there. Ali Arouzi is also on the ground in Kyiv. And Ali, symbolically, we're talking about two cities that are really important to Russia, where separatists first tried to revolt back in 2014 before Ukraine then retook them. Walk us through what we're seeing here.
Hey, Hallie. Well, it's brimming with symbolism and strategy. Symbolism because it was the first city the Russians took in 2014 when they invaded, and strategy because it's such an important place that they've been so focused on. You know, like in the Luhansk region, the Severodonetsk and Lysychansk, the two towns here that we're talking about are really important to them, Kramatorsk and Sloviansk. These are the two main cities in Donetsk. If they take those places, they own a big chunk of land in the Donetsk area. It moves their front line much further forward, and the Russians have been stating for some time now that they want to take this war west and south, and that gives them a really strong foothold to do it. And that's why they've been relentlessly shelling those two cities for weeks now, and especially the last few days. It's been brutal what the people have been suffering there, and it doesn't look like there's going to be any letting up in that shelling till they take these places. So all those people that are left there are going to feel the full brunt of the Russian invasion.
There's also this humanitarian crisis that we referenced, Ali. More than 7 million Ukrainians that have had to leave their homes. You talk with somebody who's trying to get these civilians, these innocent people, out of the way of these bullets and these bombs. Tell us about that.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, look, it's the biggest humanitarian crisis since the Second World War. It's of epic proportions. Like you mentioned, 8 million people out of the country, another 7 million displaced in this country. The guy we spoke to works with the rescue services here in Ukraine. He was saying they have to go through a treacherous road to get these people out of there. They're caught between shelling from the two sides. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
There were shellings from all sides. People were very scared. You have to understand that when people spend all the time in basement, they are going crazy. And some of them were almost crazy.
And Hallie, he was telling us that the vast majority of them are women and children, like much of the rest of the refugees in this country. That leaves a real blind spot for vulnerable people that are susceptible to human trafficking and other criminal organizations. So not only do they lose their homes, but they can get caught up in a web of very unscrupulous people.
Ali Arouzi live for us in Kyiv on an important night to be covering this story. Ali, thank you very much. To other news from overseas now, to London specifically. It's 10:30 p.m. there. Do you know who your prime minister is in the UK? Well, for now, it's Boris Johnson. Keywords being for now, because, boy, is he struggling to try to keep his job after what was reportedly a showdown at Downing Street just tonight, where some of his own cabinet ministers told him they think he's got to go. It's after the prime minister was grilled by lawmakers today about when and how much he knew about allegations of sexual misconduct made against a member of his party. And listen, Parliament is always rowdy. It was especially rowdy in this prime minister Q&A session there today. He was Boris Johnson was booed, by the way. You could hear him getting booed when he walked in. Others were shouting, go, go, because that's what they want the prime minister to do. Listen to Boris Johnson's response.
The job of a prime minister in difficult circumstances when he's been handed a colossal mandate is to keep going, and that's what I'm going to do.
We told you yesterday about those 2 key cabinet members that quit, one saying he cannot in good conscience stay under Johnson, and now 41 members in all of his government have stepped down since then. NBC News is just also learning that Johnson has fired Michael Gove, a cabinet minister who was privately calling on the prime minister to resign. That's a new development. Keir Simmons, who's live for us in London. Tell us more about that and what I think can aptly and fairly be called a hot mess right now happening in the British government.
It sure can, Hallie. Firing this politician, Michael Gove, looks like Boris Johnson trying to get back and control of the agenda. I've just been watching one of his closest allies saying he is ready for a fight. But there are many here, Hallie, who are wondering whether his dwindling gang are just trying to reenact a Shakespearean tragedy. Choose your play. Macbeth, Hamlet, Romeo and Juliet. There are bodies all over the stage at this point. 41 members of Boris Johnson's government are gone. It's never happened before in history, and you know that British politics has a long history. No, look, this is about, one of the things it's about, and it's something that folks there will recognise, is the question of integrity, whether or not you can trust Boris Johnson to tell the truth. And that's been in a succession of scandals from the parties that were held in Downing Street during lockdown, and now questions over how he responded to a politician who was accused of getting drunk and accused of sexual indiscretions towards people that he was with at a London club. So there's all that, but really what this is really about is whether Boris Johnson can get elected at the next election, given the questions over his truth-telling, if you like. A huge amount of his party have decided that he can't, are coming out and telling him to go, and yet he is saying he is determined to stay. Listen to this, Hallie. There was a group from his cabinet went into Downing Street tonight, according to reports, told him they think he should go, including one member of his cabinet who he only appointed yesterday after the previous, it was the Chancellor of the Exchequer, had resigned, and yet still he is clinging to power. Another comparison to politics over there are those suggesting, starting to make comparisons with Boris Johnson clinging on to President Trump. So we'll see whether he resigns or whether he is forced out. But the chances of him surviving seem pretty slim, Hallie.
It feels like the British government is in crisis territory, Keir, and there are some drastic scenarios you could lay out where, like, the Queen might have to get involved, et cetera. Tell us more about that and who would take over for Boris Johnson if he resigned, as we look here at other resignations that have happened in the UK over the years.
Yeah, OK, so some answers to that. In terms of the big picture, the context, what we should worry about. Listen, if they are not worried in the Biden White House, then they should be. Because, of course, Boris Johnson has been on the leading edge of supporting Ukraine, allied with President Biden over that. For there to be this kind of disarray in the Boris Johnson government, and maybe him gone and then trying to pick another leader, well, that is not going to be good for the European alliance facing down President Putin. That's one point to make. In terms of who might, take over, we don't know. There's a cast of thousands, and that's another pointer towards the question of just the amount of political chaos that we may see here. In terms of the Queen, incredible, isn't it? But there is a suggestion that if Boris Johnson is put under even more pressure by his party to go, he may say, well, I'm just going to call a general election. And that may be a constitutional crisis. The Queen might have to intervene and say, actually, you have a large party, you have other prime ministers to choose from, so I'm not going to allow you to do that. The days ahead could be pretty historic politically here.
Yeah, historic, dramatic, pick your adjective. Keir Simmons, thank you for being on it for us and stand up late for us again tonight. Appreciate it. Coming up here in the show, police in Virginia say a hero citizen helped stop a mass shooting, what officials found when they arrested the suspects. Plus, rescue teams in Italy are looking for people missing after a deadly avalanche. But a heat wave there is making it almost impossible to find them. We've got those stories and more in our 5 Things when we come back. About 1,000 people in Northern California have been told, get out of your house now because of something called the Electra fire. It has exploded in size since it broke out Monday in Amador County. So far, you got about 4,000 acres that have burned up. Thousands of people are out of power. Officials think that it's possible fireworks or maybe a 4th of July barbecue started it. And that's not the only extreme weather we're watching. 64 million people in this country are under heat alerts today, from Texas to Ohio to parts of the Carolinas. In some places, the temperatures are 10 degrees above average. It's also super humid, so it makes it feel even less comfortable than it would have otherwise. NBC News correspondent Steve Patterson has all the details for us. Steve, let me start where you are in California with this Electra fire, where here in the east, humidity is brutal. We don't like it. It could actually be helping out west, though, right?
Yeah, I just spoke to CAL FIRE about this, in fact, and humidity is good, the dew point being higher because it means there's water in the earth, so it helps to stop the spread of the fire, essentially. And we've essentially seen that. CAL FIRE telling me that essentially the acreage has not grown overnight. Usually when we're watching a fire expand, we see it go up in acreage. That has not happened. It stopped really at about 4,000 acres or so. Plus, overnight, firefighters able to get more containment on it. So it started at 5% yesterday. It's now up to 10%. Firefighters able to make progress. They're about 1,300 on the front line right now. They're doing all they can to stop the spread. There are still houses in that area, though, so they're still watching that. But the good news here, again, is that they've stopped the spread. They're able to get their equipment in there. The only problem is how steep and rugged that terrain is. So some of the bulldozers, stuff that would really knock this out where it stands, they can't do that because of how hazardous that terrain is, which means this will continue for a few more days. And in a few more days, temperatures are going to go up into something like the 90s or so. So in elevated temperatures, that humidity will drop. Firefighters really need to knock this out while they can, which is right now. Hallie.
You talk about elevated temperatures. That's what people in Dallas and Oklahoma City are bracing for. They could see the hottest it's been all year later this week, all because of something called a heat dome. Do your best Al Roker impression for us, Steve. Break down what that is.
Well, I can tell you this. For my money, this is the worst kind of heat you can experience. A heat dome, essentially, it's a high-pressure system. So you're looking at this, basically a graphic from the Washington Post, right? It's showing you what the weather is doing. It's pushing the air pressure toward the ground, trapping the heat almost in like a dome, which covers several states. So it's this massive heat dome, pushes all the cloud cover out. So you're looking at like crystal blue skies, this oppressive sun in the sky, trapping all the heat in one place. The thing I could equate it to is like when you're boiling water and you put a top on top of it. That's what people are feeling. And as we were talking about with the humidity, it traps all of that in there too. So it's almost like instead of your skin searing, that kind of heat, it's more of like you're boiling from the inside. It's very dangerous for people for a number of reasons. One is that you can't escape it. The temperature doesn't decrease when the sun drops. So at night, it's just as hot as during the day. It really is gross. And it's only going to move further west and then settle there as well. This could last several weeks. Hallie?
You sure have a way with words, Steve Patterson. Thank you. I am uncomfortable just thinking about it. Steve Patterson, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, listen to this. Police in Richmond, in Virginia, say that a tip from a hero citizen helped stop a mass shooting. Police say this person apparently overheard a conversation that hinted at a plan to attack the city's 4th of July celebration. That person reported it. 2 men got arrested. Officers found assault rifles, a handgun, hundreds of rounds of ammo in their investigation. Truly an incredible tip and incredible work. Number 2, a jury has convicted Eric R. Holder Jr. in Nipsey Hussle's murder today. The much-beloved rapper was shot in front of his own clothing store in L.A. 3 years ago. The now convicted murderer Holder faces a maximum of life in prison. He'll be sentenced in a few months. Number 3, officials in Italy say conditions on a glacier there are just not stable enough for search teams who are looking for missing hikers. At least 9 people have been killed and 3 others unaccounted for after an avalanche Sunday. Officials say there is a chunk of ice that collapsed the size of an apartment building. That is huge. They're hoping the temperatures will dip tomorrow, so there's less risk for other avalanches and rescuers can get out there safely. Number 4, the Eiffel Tower in Paris is reportedly in need of major repairs. It's riddled with rust, but it's going to only be getting a cosmetic update with a little fresh paint ahead of the 2024 Olympic Games. That's according to reports leaked to a French magazine called Marianne. The company that oversees the tower could not immediately be reached for comment. Number 5, Sotheby's says a 76 million-year-old skeleton of a T-Rex relative is being auctioned off in New York City. 10 feet tall, 22 feet long. It was discovered in 2018 in a river in Montana. If you have room in your place for this little sculpture, this could be yours for something like $5 to $8 million. Low, low price for really old dino bones. When we come back, the CDC expanding monkeypox testing because cases are still going up. We'll talk about how that move could help fight the latest outbreak next. A mysterious monument some people call the American Stonehenge, damaged by something that exploded. What officials in Georgia are saying about that coming up in the local. But first, LabCorp, one of the biggest clinical labs in the world, is starting to test for monkeypox. That's a big deal because the CDC says it basically doubles the testing capacity here in this country. It's a good thing, too, because in New York City, the epicenter for monkeypox here, infections are up 28% since just last Friday, according to local health officials. This afternoon, the city opened up more appointments for vaccinations against monkeypox. And it's not just in New York. You've got cases spreading around the world, too. The World Health Organization says today it's planning to have an emergency meeting about this outbreak later on this month. It comes as our team here at NBC News has been talking with folks who have gotten monkeypox. Most of them are gay men who are warning the LGBTQ plus community to stay alert, to look for signs on their bodies, on their partner's bodies. One person told our team, don't be afraid to say something. Somebody else spoke to us from his hospital bed and shared some of the pictures you're seeing here. He says he wasn't able to eat for days because he had lesions on his mouth. He had swellings in the lymph nodes in his neck that were so intense he couldn't actually swallow. He told us he just wants to bring people to their senses. He says, I've had the worst 3 weeks of my life. Health officials have said the vast majority of most cases have occurred among gay, bisexual, and other men, but they also stress that monkeypox can still be transmitted elsewhere. I want to bring in Dr. KAVITA Patel, who's joining us now. Dr. Patel, we're glad to have you on with this. Travel, World Health experts around the world have said that this outbreak was probably fueled by travel, by more people having sex. It's summertime. You've got tourist hotspots that are bumping right now. Officials are worried about this viral disease spreading, right? Talk about that and awareness, public awareness here.
Yeah, 3 things, Hallie. As you point out, I think there's a stigma around it. People are encouraging others appropriately to come forward because it is not a sexually transmitted disease. It just happens, as you mentioned, during these kind of events where men having sex with men or people having sex with men happen to have very close contact of these lesions. The second problem, just what you highlighted, we didn't have enough testing capacity. Hallie, I spent 4 days trying to track down a way to get someone tested. By that point, I couldn't keep them in a clinic for 4 days. I had to let them go home and go about their lives. This should help to increase that capacity. I just studied up on how we can do this. LabCorp said it's a 2 to 3 day turnaround. So we're still leaving people in limbo, but at least we have a way to test them. And then I think the third thing that needs to be kind of just make sure that it's underscored is we have a vaccine. The United States has pre-purchased vaccines. The smallpox vaccine, which we have, actually works against monkeypox, but we've also purchased the newer version of the vaccine that has less side effects. So all in all, good news, but nobody knows it unless they can check or detect for it. And that's the key here with doubling the testing capacity.
So that's what I want to go back to, because I'm struck by that story that you're telling. I mean, that's what's happening on the ground, right? You're having that experience, and it seems like wild that right now, in this day and age, in this country, it would take that long to test for something where there is this much concern about it. That is why, right, this LabCorp move is kind of a big deal.
It is. It is a big deal because it's initiated by me. You can't really just drive up. So I just want viewers to know you can't drive up to kind of your local LabCorp and ask for the test. You really do have to have it initiated by a healthcare professional. We can do the swab. We can walk through whether or not you really should be a suspect, kind of someone under consideration for being tested. I've had a lot of people come to me with kind of pimples, and we've talked about their travel history or their past 14 days, what they've been doing. And they haven't had a history that has made me think, okay, this could be monkeypox. But we are in hotspots in part of the country, and we should be thinking of this. We shouldn't do what we did in February of 2020, where we're like, no, that's just people that traveled from, China. So many of us are pleased to see the administration do this. But Hallie, honestly, it feels like too little, too late. Like we've got this. This is community spread. It is not severe. It is not at the point where everyone has to worry about it. But I do think people should be vigilant. People should not assume that it's just between persons who have sex with the identifies as the same gender. So I want to be clear about that. We have children who have had it in other countries. Likely we'll have children here too. So just be vigilant and ask the question.
Dr. KAVITA Patel, it's great, great context. Appreciate you being on with us tonight. Thank you. You can read more about the 18 people NBC News spoke with about their monkeypox experiences on NBCnews.com. The piece is up now. I commend you to it. NBC News covers hundreds of stories every day, and because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. From our Southeast Bureau, the North Carolina governor, Democrat Roy Cooper, signed an executive order meant to help protect women who travel to the state for abortion. The governor's order protects providers and patients from being extradited to states where abortion is banned. It's a preemptive move. They haven't gotten any requests to prosecute a patient or provider or to extradite one yet. Also from our Southeast Bureau, another mystery surrounding the Georgia Guidestones, referred to by some people as America's Stonehenge. Look at this. Officials say there was some kind of explosion there this morning. So obviously, like, it's not supposed to look like that. There's not supposed to be little pieces of rock on the ground. It's supposed to be intact. The remaining structure apparently had to be knocked down just this afternoon, a couple hours ago. Nobody knows who put this stuff up. They went up in 1979 with inscriptions in a dozen languages there. No arrests have been made in this explosion, but they're still investigating. For our Northeast Bureau, look at this. This is new police body cam video showing officers in just an incredible act of heroism rescuing somebody from a burning car. This is in New Jersey. Look at this. Witnesses are helping officers drag this guy through the passenger window right as fire was filling the car. It is an unbelievable moment. Apparently, the car caught on fire because of some kind of electrical malfunction. You can see how hard they're working to get him out as the flames creep closer. Luckily, they did. An incredible moment. Just a few hours ago, we learned NASA reestablished communications with a new U.S. satellite called Capstone. It's about the size of a microwave, and it launched last week to study the space around the moon. It lost touch with the Earth, but that seems sorted out now, which is good news as NASA is in a bit of drama with China after the agency's leader accused the country of trying to take over the moon, basically. NASA's Bill Nelson told a German newspaper, "We must be very concerned that China is landing on the moon and saying, it's ours now and you stay out." The Chinese Foreign Ministry firing back, accusing Nelson of lying through his teeth. NBC's Tom Costello covers all of it and is joining us now. NASA and China are still years away, right, from having what you could see as like a realistic, viable conflict concretely about people on the moon, right? Well, explain the timing and why this matters now.
Well, first of all, the timing is that NASA would like to put humans on the moon 2.5, 3 years. So that's about 2025. China is aiming for 2030 to have their own astronauts on the moon. But America has been concerned about the Chinese presence in space and how it's growing. They've built their own space station. They have astronauts on the space station. They have been launching anti-satellite test operations in space. The U.S. believes that China has a satellite with a claw on it that can reach out and grab an American satellite and disable it. In addition to that, China has a robotic post on the far side of the moon, and yet the United States cannot see what China is doing on the far side of the moon, or for that matter, in the space between the moon and Earth, an area called cislunar. So I asked the vice chairman of Space Force, the four-star general, more about what kind of eyes we need to have on that area. Is it important that the United States has eyes on what the Chinese are doing on the far side of the moon?
We need to understand both in the lunar space and the space between the Earth and the moon. What are they doing? Why are they doing it? Does it pose a potential threat to our interests?
So the language coming out of the NASA Administrator Bill Nelson saying that he's concerned that China may decide essentially they're going to control the moon and keep everybody else out. A little bit of hyperbole, but it underscores the seriousness that Space Force, that NASA right now has about what China's intentions really are on the moon and in space.
Can you take a beat and explain why can't we see what China's up to on the far side of the moon? Like, what is the U.S. doing about that?
We don't have a satellite right now that has eyes on that side of the moon, period. And we don't have a satellite aimed at the space between the moon and Earth. All of our satellites are aimed at Earth, right? Because you're going to be directing your comms towards Earth and your spy satellites toward Earth. So now, listen, Space Force views it as a high priority to put a satellite with eyes, in other words, a great camera and good sensing equipment in that space between the moon and Earth, and also around the moon, so we have a better sense of what China's doing there. As the U.S. and China both want to build lunar bases. I need to stress, under a 1967 treaty that everybody signed, it's against that treaty. It's illegal to build a military base on the moon. But NASA and China are talking about civilian bases on the moon.
Tom Costello, I got to tell you, if this fascinates people as much as it fascinates me, they're going to be excited to see your documentary on this because you covered all of this. I have like 35 seconds left in the show. I'm going to give you that time to plug Battlefield Space. Tell us about it.
Thank you very much. We went in depth on Battlefield Space and Space Force and its role. You can watch it on YouTube, on NBC News Now, on NBCNews.com. And if you scan that QR code right down there at the bottom with your phone, it'll take you right to it. Battlefield Space on YouTube is a great way to watch it. Thank you.
Tom Costello, it's amazing. It's great work, and we're glad to have you on to talk about it. Really appreciate it, friend. Thank you. That does it for us for this hour. We will, of course, have more for you here tomorrow, same time, same place. See you then. Coverage picks up right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.